Hey everyone, Will here, and I've got a good presentation on student loans and how student loans work. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's something I wish I really knew before I took out student loans, especially for grad school. And student loans are one of those things where they're really easy to get and then really hard to pay off, right? And there's a ton of different examples of things like that in life, right? Like you jump into a pool, it takes you 2 seconds to get wet and then 6 hours to dry off, right? So student loans are way too easy to get. You can get them if you get accepted almost any college or graduate school. You can borrow a huge amount of money, and at the end of the day, it can take you a really long time to pay back, even if you don't complete your degree program. But this particular talk and presentation is really going to focus on all the different aspects of what happens when you take a student loan out and what type of interest accrues and the basic mechanics. Again, these are all things I really wish I knew before I ended up taking out student loans for myself. So let's take a look at the loan process for both a normal loan and a student loan. So normally when you want to take out a loan, the normal loan process is what I call it, you're going to apply for a loan, and a bank or someone at the bank is going to analyze your ability to repay, right? So they're going to look at your risk, the current market conditions, how much is interest, other factors, how much money you make, how likely are you to pay the loan back. Now, based on those conditions, the bank is going to give you an amount that you can borrow and a given interest rate. Okay, so there's basically two different variables. The more risk you present to the bank, essentially, if you don't make a lot of money and they don't think you're going to pay it back, they're going to be able to loan you less money, and it's going to cost you more in interest to borrow the money. Conversely, if you're making a lot of money and you have really good credit and you're highly likely to pay the bank back, they're going to be able to loan you more money at a better interest rate. Now, if we want to juxtapose the normal loan with a student loan, we can see the differences as follow, the key differences. So basically, when we're talking about student loans, we're not applying for money through the school. We're basically applying for money through the U.S. government or a federal grant program for most purposes. There still are a few private lenders, but it's very rare. A majority of lending, especially in grad school, is going to come directly from the U.S. government. So in this instance, the U.S. government is going to act as the bank. And because the U.S. government is acting as the bank, the amount of money that you're able to borrow is not tied into whether or not you're likely to repay the money, what the market conditions are, what the current interest rates are, things like that. So the amount of money available is going to be predetermined. It's going to be set by Congress. The interest rate's also going to be set by Congress. And one really key difference that I can't highlight enough is that when you take out student loans, unlike any other loan that you take out, you actually can't discharge student loans through the process of bankruptcy. And the reason that's important is because that means that the student loan will stick with you if you can't repay it back for most likely, the rest of your life. So let's look at the kind of the key factors about student loans that distinguish them from other loans, and why you have to be really careful before thinking about taking out student loans. So the first thing, as you can see here, student loans are easy to borrow. There's no pre-approval process or anything like that. For the most part, you just fill out paperwork at the financial aid office of your school. They'll actually help you fill this out. Most of the money goes directly to your school. So when a student loan, unlike an actual loan, is disbursed, the government sends the money to the financial aid office. Once the financial aid office receives the money, they subtract all the tuition that's owed for that semester, and all the other fees, registration fee, book fee, health fees, whatever other fees the school charges you, and you only get what's left over. So you get the remainder. So the school actually gets paid first. You're on the hook for paying that back, and then you get whatever's left over. So oftentimes, because tuition and fees are so high, you're going to be able to have to utilize multiple different federal loan programs, okay? And each loan program will have different interest rates, different repayment periods, different limits, and different servicers. So if you use 3 or 4 different federal programs or lenders to be able to pay for all your tuition and your living expenses and your books and things like that, all those can be tied to different interest rates, different repayment time, different basically grace periods. So some of these loans are going to be due 6 months after you graduate. Others will be due 9 months. Some of them accrue interest from the moment you borrow the money all the way to when you begin paying back. Others are subsidized. So it can be a really, really confusing process. Now it's really important to consider before you embark on graduate or professional school, what are the consequences going to be of borrowing a very large amount of money? There's very few graduate programs that exist today that I can think of off the top of my head that are truly quote unquote affordable. Most undergrads nowadays and most graduate programs, and again this is the focus of this presentation, is the graduate programs, they really have exorbitant costs. So the cost of tuition has greatly outpaced inflation. And one of the reasons why is because borrowing money is so easy. So before taking out any money, you want to know what are the consequences. Okay, because once you appreciate the consequences and the future costs of student loans, then you can begin to really evaluate your goals and make an informed decision. Okay, one, whether to attend the school at all, what school to attend, and how you will pay for school, right? So maybe you get into a school that's not as highly ranked as you could have, so you've gotten into a highly ranked school but they offer you no money, or a school that's not as highly ranked but they're giving you a 50% or 60 or 75% scholarship where you won't have to borrow as much money. So those are all things you want to be able to consider before making the decision to go to school, because ultimately it comes down to this point right here. How are you going to pay for school? Okay, and some people, their parents are able to help them, or their grandparents or their relatives, and that's really great. But if you're on your own or you're thinking about taking out loans, you're going to need to understand the basics of how finances work. And most people, again, including myself, never took a finance course or anything like that. I took econ, I learned all that stuff, but in terms of the day-to-day basics about how interest works and how loans work, I had no clue until I'd already borrowed over $100,000 in student loans. Because most people, if you're 21, 22, 23, even 24, 25, you're going to grad school, you've never taken out a home mortgage or anything. Maybe best case scenario, you have an auto loan. So this is going to go through and explain all the different forms of interest, accrual, capitalization, and things like that, which you need to know before you borrow any amount of money. So where do problems arise? Again, this wouldn't be an issue if problems didn't arise. So problems always arise, because, and I can't stress this enough, the amount of money you borrow is not reflective, again, in monetary terms, of future gain in income or employment opportunities, okay? Basically, that means you spend a lot of money or you borrow a lot of money to go to school, and then your career path after going to school, either you don't like what you're doing or you're not earning the type of money that you thought you would earn. So again, if you're not receiving a good return on investment from your education, you may have learned a lot, but you will not earn a lot. And again, the knowledge that you learn is intangible, right? You can't really put a value on it. But again, job prospects and things like that, you can put a value on. So the unfortunate reality is, if education costs a lot less, you'd never have to think about these things and do kind of a balancing act. But the problem is that so many graduate programs cost so much money that you're forced into asking yourself the question, financially, what will this do for me if I have the degree versus I don't have the degree? Okay, and many times the answer to that is that financially you won't be any better off, you may be less better off, or you'll only be slightly better off. And those, small increases in earnings don't offset the amount of money that you borrowed to go to school. Okay, and realistically this manifests itself in a couple ways. One is that you can borrow quite a bit of money and your monthly payments are going to be too high. So what happens is that you're going to have to opt for one of any number of payment assistance programs. They're commonly referred to as pay as you earn. And those programs basically say that if you're not earning enough money to pay back your student loans, we'll reduce your bill payment. And those programs have a huge number of problems. That's a whole separate presentation that I'm working on right now. But basically, there's a lot of people that I know and I went to school with, and they opt for these pay-as-you-earn programs. And pay-as-you-earn basically means that you pay only a percentage of your income, so 10% of your income. But most of the time, that's not enough to cover the interest, which we'll get to a little bit later in this talk, and that's an important concept to focus on. And so their loan balance will actually continue to increase with every payment that they make, which is kind of opposite. The other really big issue that I want to highlight is that you can borrow a ton of money. People who go to law school or med school or things like that, they'll be able to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're only making like $50,000 in residency or $40,000 as a starting attorney. So what does that mean? It means that your debt to income ratio negatively impacts your real world ability to borrow money. So you're able to borrow $200,000, say, or $250,000 to go to law school, or $300,000 to go to med school, and then when you get out and you're making $50,000 as a resident or $60,000 as a resident, your credit score is completely obliterated because your debt to income ratio is just totally crazy. So no bank or any other institution would loan someone $300,000 at an extremely high interest rate if they're only going to make $50,000 per year. And so say that happens to you, you won't be able to buy a house or purchase a car or anything like that, because people are going to run your credit. They're going to see your debt to income ratio, and it's going to be absolutely horrible. So the other big issue I want to highlight is that all programs for the federal government purposes are essentially treated as equal. This is not the case. So different careers have different earnings paths, right? So the safest bets right now for getting a return on your investment, for taking a large amount of money out, are going to be medical school or veterinary school, okay? Because there are two professions. I know many people that have gone through it. They borrowed a lot of money and they're able to make their payments and pay their loans back because there's a shortage of doctors and there's a shortage of veterinarians, but it's very hard to get into these two schools. Okay, so these two professions, you're really likely to pay your loans and also have a good quality of life. Okay, so safer bets you're starting to get on the borderline would be pharmacy school or dental school. So these are two professions where you'll take out a lot of money. You will be able to repay your loans. It's going to take a lot longer, maybe not in 10 years, but 15 years. And the quality of your life is going to take a little bit of a hit for the first couple of years because you're going to be spending so much money paying back your loans. But then kind of once you get everything taken care of, the ship will right itself and you'll be able to probably have, if you're financially responsible, a pretty good path forward. But again, it's going to take a lot longer than medical school or veterinary school because you're going to earn less money, but you're going to take out proportionally almost the same amount of money. Then we have bad bets. So bad bets are going to be law school, Master's in Business Administration, culinary school, for-profit colleges, PhD programs, or master's programs in esoteric fields. So all of these, barring a few exceptions, again, if you go to Yale or Harvard Law School and you get a top-notch job in New York, you're going to be fine. Same thing with an MBA, right? If you go to like Wharton School of Business or Cornell and you work at an investment firm, that's fine. But that represents less than like 3%, maybe 5% of all MBA programs. So that's why I'm lumping it in. The vast majority of people who go to law school, who get an MBA, who go to culinary school, or who engage in education at a for-profit college are going to be able to take out the same amount of money as a doctor or a pharmacist or a dentist, okay? And all the schools, the amount of tuition that they charge you is very similar. So if you go to Harvard, you're going to pay roughly the same amount, minus like maybe $5,000 a year, than if you go to like a terribly ranked law school or terribly ranked MBA program, right? But there's a huge difference in job outcomes, okay? But that's not reflected in the tuition. So what you have happening is a lot of people are able to borrow $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 to go to a really poorly ranked law school, MBA school, or a for-profit college. They get a degree in an obscure field of psychology, and what they find out is that once they graduate and have this degree, they're no better off once they get their degree from before when they didn't have the degree. The only difference is now you have $200,000 of non-dischargeable debt. Every single day it's accruing interest, and all of a sudden it casts a really big shadow over every aspect of your financial life. So in order to kind of contextualize everything, I've actually put together a real-life example of graduate school and student loan borrowing, and this is using figures that are as up-to-date as possible. And most graduate schools are going to offer multiple different loan programs. So if you go to graduate school, you'll be able to utilize any number of different loan programs. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the two largest ones. That's going to be an unsubsidized Stafford loan. If you utilize this program, it will allow you to borrow $20,500 per year. The interest rate, which again is set by Congress, this maximum borrowing rate again is set by Congress. So the interest rate is 6.21%. As of today, this is May of 2017, I could buy a $1 million home and pay 3.95% interest. So this is much higher than it would be to borrow much more money for a home. And that's for a jumbo loan. If you go non-jumbo, which in the county I live in, which is under $550,000, you could probably get something for around 4%. Okay, there's going to be a 1.068% origination fee. So that means that if you borrow $1,000, they're taking 1% of that. Okay, so if you borrow this 20,000 figure here, 1% of it you won't even see. Okay, so in the case of this, if you borrow, 20,500, you're not going to see 20,500. You're going to see like 2,200, because this 1% they're going to take away, a little over, $200 from you. That's just their fee for giving you the loan. Repayment is going to begin 6 months after graduation. There's also Grad Plus loans. This is a huge federal program. Okay, these actually, they have a limit. I don't recall what it is, but they basically allow you to borrow up to the full cost of attendance, right? So anything that you can't fill in with an unsubsidized Stafford loan, the Grad Plus loans are going to come in and they're going to be able to fill that for you. Okay, these do require a simple credit check, but again, you can have horrible credit and still borrow like $40,000 or $50,000 a year. The interest rate, which you'll note, is extremely high at 7.2%. That's even higher than the unsubsidized Stafford loan. And the origination fee is a whopping 4.272%. Repayment, again, similar to the unsubsidized Stafford loan, is going to begin 6 months after graduation. I do want to point out that the Stafford loan is unsubsidized. Grad Plus loan, also unsubsidized. That means from the moment you take out your first loan check, you begin accruing interest. Okay, so that's going to become important, and we're going to see that occur in the next couple slides with the real life example. So again, like I said, we're doing a real life example. I went online and calculated the actual cost of going to law school today, the year 2017. So this information here, tuition, fees, books, housing, food, transportation, personal/miscellaneous, student loan fees, total, okay, are all taken from the budget of the website for the University of San Diego School of Law. You can find all this information here. So this is important. This number right here is what the school says you will need to attend the school for 1 year, which means that between your Stafford loan, which is unsubsidized, and your Grad Plus loan, you would be able to borrow $75,160 per year, because again, there's really a very vague cap. They allow you to borrow the cost of attendance. Schools can decide what they want to charge you, and then the federal government's going to be able to loan you this money. And again, I want to make a note. I am not against the federal government loaning money. I'm pro-education. I'm pro-loaning money. But again, you need to have some checks and balances. Otherwise, schools can just charge you whatever you want and just get a blank check from the student government, or from the federal government. And that's what we have going on right here. So this law school example, okay, the yearly cost of going to law school, like we showed on the last slide, is going to be $75,160. Okay, and you're able to borrow this amount using a combination of unsubsidized Stafford loans and Grad Plus loans. Okay, and remember that unsubsidized Stafford loan have a yearly limit of $20,500. Okay, so this is your total cost of tuition right here at $75,160. The unsubsidized Stafford loan, which you want to use because it has a lower interest rate, is going to clock in at $20,500. Your remaining balance is going to be $54,660. So of the money that you owe, you're going to borrow the remainder, the $54,660 from the Grad Plus program. Now, what I don't show here, but I probably should have done it in retrospect, is that remember that the Grad Plus loan had that origination fee that was like 4%. So because it has a 4% origination fee, if you were to borrow $54,660, you would only get a check for like $52,000. They'd subtract $2,000. So realistically, to get this much money to come up with your tuition and living shortfall, you'd actually need to borrow about $3,000 more. So it'd be about $57,660, and then the school, or not the school, but the loan originator would then charge you a 4% origination fee, and that 4% origination fee would be like $2,500 or $3,000, which would then take you down to this. So you'd actually need to borrow a little bit more, which is again one of the ways that the bills stack up and are a little bit more than you would actually consider or think about when you're considering your budget and how much money overall you'll have to borrow to go to school. Okay, so continuing with the same law school example, the cost of law school $75,160. How much are you going to owe upon graduation? Answer one, what most people, including myself, think. Well, I borrowed $75,160, so if I borrow this much money for 3 years, $71,160 times 3 is going to equal $225,480. Easy. Okay? The actual answer is going to be $225,480 plus whatever interest has accrued, okay, during the 3 years that you're in school. Okay? And I want to make a note. You can choose to pay the interest as it accrues, in which case the amount owed would actually be this. But this would mean the month you begin borrowing money from the school and getting these Grad Plus loans, you start making payments every single month while you're in school. Whether you have a part-time job or, you know, any source of income that you have, you actually pay the interest as it accrues. Almost nobody does this because they don't have that type of steady income. Okay, and so accrued interest. This is a huge topic. This is something I did not understand at all. Okay, each loan will begin to accrue interest the day it is disbursed. Okay, so say your school begins September 1, 2017. Tuition is usually charged twice per year. So September, fall, and then spring, like March or even earlier, sometimes in January, right? Okay, so this means that your loan is going to be disbursed in 2 halves each school year. So on September 1, 2017, your tuition is due. You've applied for both a unsubsidized Stafford loan as well as a Grad Plus loan. So what happens, because the Stafford loan is $20,500 per year, they break it up. They give you half the first semester, half the second semester. So on September 1, 2017, $10,250 from a Stafford loan at 6.21% interest and a 1% origination fee is disbursed. Okay, on September 1, 2017, the remainder of your balance, which is $27,330 from a Grad Plus loan at 7.2% interest rate and a 4.272 origination fee, is disbursed to you. Okay, now your loans on the Stafford loan, just for this first semester, of the $10,250, okay, $109.47 is subtracted from origination. You're left with $10,140.53. This is applied to your current balance with your school/university. For your Grad Plus loan, of the $27,330, $1,100, okay, 67 is subtracted for origination, and you're going to be left with $26,162.46. That's going to be paid to your parent institution. It's going to be applied to your current balance. Now, after tuition and fees, okay, you're going to have a disbursement, meaning that any extra money you have is going to be disbursed to you. Okay, so tuition and fees based on that previous slide, is going to be $26,285.50 minus disbursement, which is more than that amount, $36,302.99, is going to give you $10,017.49 for books, rent, everything else for that first semester. Not too bad. Okay, so what's the bottom line? How does this work? What are the mechanics? Okay, meaning let's go through and discuss kind of every step and how interest accrues. So September 1, 2017 hits, you're disbursed this total amount, right? Interest begins to accrue immediately. This is the big flag that I want to raise for people, okay? Then once the second semester starts, we'll call this February 1, 2017, you're disbursed the remaining half, the other $37,580. Interest begins to accrue immediately on this. So the easiest way to understand the accrual of interest in this particular scenario is to break it up and think how much interest accrues per day. And it's going to be a little small number, but those small number over a lot of days is really going to add up, right? So on September 1st, 2017, you take out $37,580. I've weighted the averages of the unsubsidized Stafford and the Grad Plus, okay? So that means that you're going to take out $37,580 at an average interest rate of 6.93%. Again, that's the weighted average of the two loans. Each day on this amount of money, you owe $7.13 or 13 cents in interest. Okay, so after your first year of school, right? You finish your first year, this is just the first semester money, you're going to owe $2,604.25 in interest. And that's just off that first tranche of loans. Okay, so law school, as you know, is going to be 3 years. Your first loan disbursement of $37,580 will accrue interest until you graduate, which is going to be 3 years later in May or June, plus the time to study for the bar exam, and the deferral period is 6 months, which equals a payback date sometime in November or December of 2019. Okay. So from the date of the initial loan disbursement until graduation, and then until repayment, right? Because you graduate and then you have a grace period because no one gets a job the day after they graduate from law school. You have to take the bar exam, okay? So you're looking at about 3 years and 1 month, or 1,125 days. So 1,125 times the amount of interest that accrues per day, which is $7.13, means that by the time you start repaying your loan, you've accrued roughly $8,000 of interest. And again, this is just on your first semester. So your first semester alone, in addition to costing $37,580, costs an additional $8,021.25. That's just accrued in the last 3 years. Okay, but there's more. Your first loan disbursement of $37,500 accrues $8,000 of interest. Roughly, it can be off by a few dollars here or there based on what type of interest calculator you use, okay, before you start repayment. Your second loan disbursement for your second semester, okay, doesn't accrue interest for as many days, right? Because it's disbursed 3 months later in January or February, whenever your second semester begins. So your second disbursement of $37,580 accrues 3 months less than the first disbursement. Repayment begins, you only owe $7,370.40 of interest, which has accrued during that 3-year period minus 3 months. Okay, and this goes for every single semester that you borrow money, right? So semester 1 obviously is going to be the longest, right? You borrow the same money every single semester. Now, realistically, tuition will increase every year. So semester 1 and semester 2 will be the same. Semester 3 will go up by a little bit. It'll be the same as semester 4. And then semester 5 and 6 will also go up. And so the number of days your interest accrues actually decreases, right? Because you're borrowing the money for the less amount of time. First semester is going to be the worst, okay? From September 1st until you pass the bar and you get that first job, you've accrued interest for over 1,000 days. This is 3 months less, also over 1,000 days. Then when you go into the third semester, which is going to be your second year, and semester 4, you can see it go down until finally you get to your last semester. It's only 300 days. But each day, you remember, you're getting $7 of interest. So that first loan you get is going to charge you $8,000. The second semester is $7,000, then $5,000, $4,000, $2,000, $2,000. So when all's said and done, just for borrowing the money to go to school, you owe an additional $30,566.31 in accrued interest. That is a huge amount to tack on to all your loans. Okay, and what happens to accrued interest with student loans? It becomes, and this is key, capitalized interest. Okay, so we just discussed that over the course of your studies for law school, your loans will accrue $30,566 in interest. Now, this amount of money, the $30,000, is capitalized, meaning that it's added to your balance. Once it's added to your balance, the capitalized interest generates interest of its own, meaning that your loan is even harder to pay off because each month it will generate even more interest. Okay, and again, just to point out, you borrow this much money each semester for 6 semesters, 3 years of school. Okay, so you're going to owe this much total just by borrowing the money. Okay, and then of this total, okay, you're generating $42.81 per day in interest. So each day you need to come up with this amount of money, or the amount of money you owe increases. If you don't come up and pay $42 a day, which again, most banks and companies will add up, and at the end of the month you owe this amount, right? Okay, then your balance will technically increase. Okay, and so what I want to point out is that the $30,000 is capitalized, so that's all the interest that accrues. Okay, and that means that it's added to your balance. And not only is that $30,566 added to your balance, okay, but now that total balance accrues interest of its own at the same rate. Okay, so instead of initially borrowing $225,480, it accrued $30,566. That's then added to the amount you borrow. So instead of owing this much money, and instead of this much money generating interest, you now owe $30,000 more, so $256,000. Okay, and this amount of money, which is greater than what you initially borrowed, now generates interest at 6.93%. So each day, instead of having to come up, okay, with the $42 per day, you now need to come up with $48.61 per day. So it's generating even more interest. It's even harder to pay off, and that's the issue with capitalized interest. Okay, so basically capitalized interest means you pay more on the amount you borrow. Okay, the accrued interest is added to your capital, and a higher amount of capital begins to accrue interest. So more interest is generated daily. Most banks calculate their interest daily. It means you need more money to pay off your principal balance because your principal balance has increased, and you need more money to pay to even put a dent in your principal. So we'll think about this in terms of the month, okay? Without capitalized interest in a 30-day month, you're going to need $1,284 to break even. When that capitalized interest, and all loans capitalize their interest for student loans, you're going to need $48 per day, 30 days. Okay, so $1,458 to break even. So almost $200 more per month you're going to need to be able to pay your loans back. That's a big difference, right? Okay, so with the capitalized interest model, you're going to need this much money to break even at the start of repayment, okay? And this is going to be true for any repayment plan. You can hear people say, oh, if you can't do a 10-year repayment plan, do a 30, or do IBR, or do pay, or something, pay as you earn, etc. Nothing, no payment plan, no amount of time that you string it out for, nothing will change this amount right here. Every single month, you need to come up with $1,458.30, or else your balance rises, okay? That's regardless of whether you're on a 10-year plan, a 30-year plan, IBR, or pay, etc. If you pay less than this amount for the first month that you owe money, the amount of money that you owe will actually increase, okay? So let's take that example, right? You owe $256,046 in principal. You make a $2,000 payment. That's a lot of money, right? Now, since you accrue $1,458.30 a month of your $2,000 payment, only the difference between the interest and what you paid is deducted from your principal. Okay, so you pay $2,000. You've accrued in 1 month $1,458.30. So only $541.70 is deducted from your principal. Now, if you can't afford this $2,000 payment and you pay less, for example, $1,000, your principal will actually increase. That's going to be the subject of another presentation. Okay, so after 1 month of payment, you now owe, because again, you paid $2,000, $541 is deducted from your principal, $255,504.30. Okay, that now generates $48.51 of interest per day, whereas previously owing the amount of money that you did, which was $256,046, that generated $1,458.30 per month. So you've again stepped your interest rate down by a few dollars per month. Okay, so basically, big picture here, each month you make a payment, your principal decreases and your accrued interest decreases. I'll have a graph for that in a subsequent presentation. Okay, again, looking at the payment plans, the basic ones, if you owe this amount, your monthly payment is going to be almost $3,000 a month. After 10 years of making payments of this much money, $2,963, you will have paid $355,642.15. Okay, that equates to your original loan balance of $256,000 and change, plus about $100,000 in interest. Now, if you have gone ahead and extended your payment plan to 25 or 30 years, you're going to end up paying more. So if you owe this much, which again is the same as this much, but you want to do a monthly payment on a 30-year plan, it's going to lower your payment to $1,691 a month, over $1,000 less per month. But again, the same amount of interest is going to accrue. So after making payments for 30 years, best case scenario, you graduate law school at 25 and you finish paying off 3 years of school, okay, at 55, and you pay $1,691 a month for 30 years, you would have paid $608,919 over the lifetime of the loan, which is going to be your original loan balance of $256,000 plus a whopping $352,873.15 in interest. So the more you string your loan out, the more money you're going to pay overall for your education. Okay, and so just to kind of summarize some of the big pictures, right? The amount of principal you borrow, e.g. how much tuition is minus scholarships, drastically changes the amount of money you must pay each month just to keep your balance from increasing. Okay, borrowing for student loans, very few checks and balances. It's way too easy to take out a large amount of money. It's very difficult to repay that money, and you can't repay that money in bankruptcy, making it a very risky proposition for the student, and the schools assume almost no risk. Okay, so essentially what happens is that you're just a conduit. The loan money flows through you, goes to the school to pay tuition. 20% of that money goes into your pocket for living expenses, and you're on the hook for the 100% remaining amount of money. Okay, the interest rates are going to be unusually high, especially given the current economy. Again, this is in 2017. Interest rates have been historically low since the Great Recession in 2008. You should not be paying more than 3 or 4%, but again, you're paying double that as a student. Okay, if you pay less than the monthly interest that you accrue, your loan balance will actually increase. I have a whole separate presentation on this. Please tune into it. I'll put a link at the bottom of this page. That's it. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, you can always send me an email, will@tritonknowledge.com, and I will be more than happy to respond to you. And thank you for listening in to another episode of Career and Professional Advice on tritonknowledge.com. Take it easy, and any questions, make sure to email me. Bye, guys.